And I made it really clear to my dentist. I said, nobody will take any notice of this. You probably cannot see this in the film, but it's for me. All of those things, all of those contributions helped me as I was creating Paul.
Hi, this is the Awardist. I'm Clarissa Cruz, executive editor of Entertainment Weekly, and I'm here with Delroy Lindo, star of Netflix's The Five Bloods. Welcome, Delroy, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Tell me, lots of people saw this film, but for those who haven't, can you tell me a little bit of what it's about?
It's about four Vietnam vets returning to Vietnam to find the remains of a fallen comrade that they lost back in their time in Vietnam. And there is a secondary objective that they have, which I am not going to tell you because I want you to see the film.
Black GI, is it fair to serve more than the white Americans that sent you here? Nothing is more confused than to be ordered into a war to die without the faintest idea of what's going on. I dedicate this next record to the soul brothers of the 1st Infantry Divisions. Be safe.
This is your fourth collaboration with Spike Lee.
Yeah.
Your relationship with him spans over 3 decades. Tell me how he approached you for this one, since it's been a little while since Clockers. So and Crooklyn and all of this. So tell me
Sure.
how.
All right, so I'll give you the short version. The short version was that he called me and said he had this script that he wanted to send me and that I should read it and then let him know what I thought. He sent it to me. I read it. I called him back, let him know what I thought, which was, of course, I wanted to do it, but it's been very well documented at this point. Numerous times that I had one little problem. I had one little issue. And we discussed that. It was not a lot of discussion. It had to do with, I did not want to be a Trump supporter. We talked about that briefly. A few days later, Spike called me back and said he really needed Paul to be a Trump supporter. I read the script 2 additional times and was able to come to terms emotionally and psychologically with how my character could end up being not only a Trump supporter, but a MAGA hat wearing Trump supporter. Once I had come to terms with that, I called Spike and said, I'm in.
Yeah. Well, what got you to come to terms with that? Because I can imagine that must have been difficult.
Yeah, difficult in as much as, from a political standpoint, it was complete anathema to everything that I stand for. And also, I remember I remember speaking to Spike, and one of the first things I said was, man, I have at that time, a 17-year-old son. I don't want to have to validate this to my son. How do I talk to my son about doing this? But to your question, how did I get my head around it? How did I come to terms with it? I came to terms with it after having read it the 3rd time. I realized that, or I devised for myself a logic having to do with the amount of loss that Paul has suffered and the extent to which Paul feels profoundly betrayed and abandoned. Given that I volunteered, Paul volunteered, was not drafted to go to Vietnam. I volunteered 3 tours, and there's a depth of betrayal and abandonment that I feel, so that I've also experienced loss, not only the loss of my wife in childbirth, the loss of my son, having to do with the fact that we are deeply at odds with each other. So there is loss, betrayal, and abandonment. Therefore, I recognized that when this individual came along in 2015, talking about the fact that he was going to make things right for all people who had felt disenfranchised, disconnected, I believe that. I needed to believe that, because I needed a win in my life. And so that was the logic that I created for myself, um, that resulted in my casting that vote in 2016.
All right. I'm gonna teach you that. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
You got the paperwork, man?
You can see I got the paperwork with me.
Is that a Magna hat? God damn.
You know, one of the things that struck me about the film is, you know, it deals in history in different ways. Obviously, you know, the Vietnam War, but also the American Civil Rights Movement. And at the time that the
You should
movie,
know one thing, sorry,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Vietnamese people refer to it as the American War.
as the American War, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. That's
But
right.
anyway, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I mean, what struck me is, you know, watching this, I mean, I saw it, it must have been around June, must have been around May or June. And it was, you know, in the wake of the George Floyd protests. And what struck me is that a lot of there was some cuts in the movie that resonated in a different way because of what was happening in America at the time. I mean, how do you feel about this movie that thoroughly explores history, but is also very contemporary?
I feel that it is a tremendous affirmation for the work, for Spike, that he happened to be, that the film lands right in the middle of the zeitgeist. That's the word that I've continually used. And that speaks to Spike Lee's vision as a creative worker. Obviously, there was no way we could have anticipated the events of this past year. However, it does speak to the fact that Spike Lee, as a filmmaker, elects not only to present certain stories to his audiences, but elects to present those stories in a certain style, in a certain way. And in this instance with the Five Bloods, it turned out to be, you know, profoundly fortuitous, profoundly and tragically fortuitous that it landed when it landed.
Tell me how your relationship with Spike has evolved since you first started working with him. I mean, like I said, there's 3 decades worth here. I mean, do you have a shorthand by now? Like, is there a way that you communicate that?
Yeah, I'd like to believe that there is a shorthand. It's interestingly, it's not something that we've ever discussed, but I'd like to believe that there is a shorthand. And the basis for the shorthand is that he trusts me. That's a hell of a thing to say. It's a hell of a thing. It's an extraordinary thing for any actor to say of any director, of any co-worker. He trusts me. He or she trusts me. Therefore, there is a security blanket, a foundation of affirmation, to use that word again. And it started on Malcolm X, frankly. And that trust has, I won't even say it's grown. I guess it's grown because it was kind of sort of always there. I would say to you, how has the relationship changed? You know, when Spike called me about this, about the Five Bloods, he said some things to me on the telephone conversation that felt to me very unspike-like.
Also,
based on my recollection of him. They were just real affirming. They were very, very warm. And I'm not saying that he's not a warm person. I'm just saying in terms of how he was communicating with me. I remember coming home, I was in my car and I pulled over and we were talking on the phone. And when I got home, I told my lady, I said, you know, I just talked to Spike. And it was just very warm, very supportive. So that is an element that has grown. And you know, all of the various interviews that I have done in support of this film, and cumulatively, I'm almost getting to a point where I'm thinking, I don't want to say too good to be true, but it feels profoundly affirming, not only in terms of Spike and my working relationship with him, but more broadly in terms of the response to the film, the response to Spike, the response to all of us, which has been so positive, deeply positive and affirming. I hope that becomes a point of departure for whatever future work we do together.
That's so nice. That must be a great feeling.
It is a great feeling.
Yeah.
It absolutely is.
Yeah. Tell me, I mean, this role for you, I mean, your performance was just astounding. I thought it was incredible. Tell me what sort of research you did. And I read that you had a couple of cousins who served in Vietnam and
Yeah.
you did that, but can you tell me a little bit about what the process was like?
Yeah. My two cousins were the first vets that I spoke with. And because we're family, everybody that I spoke with was incredibly generous with their time. But my cousins, they came to I was working on the East Coast. They came up to my house and they just sat with me and we talked as family, essentially, as family. But the fact that they're both Vietnam vets, interestingly, they both had very, very different experiences in Vietnam. My one cousin was 18 years old. My son is 19. My cousin was 18 when he was drafted. And inside the first week, he was in country fighting. Right. So they both talked about their experiences, shared their experiences with me. And I'm taking notes furiously as they're sitting in my living room talking to me. I'm watching their body language. I'm watching how their body language changes as they speak about certain events in Vietnam that happened to them, and I'm recording. So I'm getting this full court press of an experience. And that was the foundation. The one cousin gave me, at the end of our time together, he gave me a box full of photographs. He said, "Hey man, take this. If it's useful, give it back to me when you're done, but take these, take a look at these, see if anything's useful." And that kind of generosity, that kind of trust, and yes, we're family, they're my cousins, but it just was giving me a gargantuan jumping off point to begin this work. I took the box. He also gave me, in addition to these photographs, he gave me some, they weren't commendations. They were like, I don't know, plaques from his battalion. Mm-hmm. So I had all of this stuff to begin my work, my research. I then sought out a number of other vets, all of whom spoke with me on the phone. They all spoke about different aspects of their experiences. And then I was also introduced finally to a major, a vet of the Iraq War. She was a major. And she met with me also and just talked to me. And all of these vets were gifting me this extraordinary information. It's really interesting because, you've probably heard yourself that vets don't talk, most vets, they don't talk about their experiences with civilians. They don't share, they don't talk. So the fact that I was being given all of this information was being shared with me, I did not take lightly and I did not take for granted. I looked at documentary film. I looked at Ken Burns's film. I looked at something called The Anderson Platoon, which featured a colonel, I believe. He was the only African-American leader of a platoon in Vietnam. His last name is Anderson. I don't remember his first name. And I also read a number of books. And when I got to Thailand, Spike brought in a couple of vets to speak with us. So I had this, kind of kaleidoscopic, this range of data that I exposed myself to. In addition to talking to the vets, I looked at film and I read books. And all of those things formed a really solid foundation for me as I was entering into this work. One of the books that I read was a book called Bloods by a man named Wallace Terry. Are you familiar with Bloods?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these verbatim accounts of vets. And one of the photographs in Bloods was of one of the vets, and his teeth were crooked. And I looked at the photograph and I said, I want teeth kind of sort of like that. So I went to my dentist, and I spoke with the props person on the film, and my dentist made a cast of my teeth, and the props person made a cast of my teeth that kind of sort of resembled the kind of crookedness in my teeth that I wanted. Now, I'm mentioning that to you because there were all these small little elements that contributed to the work. And I made it really clear to my dentist. I said, nobody will take any notice of this. You probably cannot see this in the film, but it's for me. All of those things, all of those contributions helped me as I was creating Paul.
The scene where it's a monologue and you're looking down at the camera. I mean, I just got chills. I saw that and I was like, this is Shakespearean. This is a soliloquy.
Yeah.
Amazing. Tell me what it was like shooting that, and what sort of direction you got from Spike, or what were you pulling from there?
One thing he said to me on the very first take, where I come through the underbrush, I come through and I start talking, and the very first take, I came through and I stopped and I looked around, and then I proceeded to walk and talk. And he said, no, I need you, when you come through, don't stop, keep walking. That was the only direction he gave me. It's been so interesting to receive the responses that people have to that monologue. Because I just took it on as yet another responsibility that I had to contribute to the film. I did not know, I had no clue that it would have that kind of impact, that it would have the kind of impact that it has had. I prepared slightly differently for that particular monologue because there were so many words that I had to learn the words. And ordinarily I wouldn't work like that. I would try to have the language sit into me more organically, but because it was such a lot of language, I had to learn it. In the weeks leading up to shooting the scene, whenever I had a break, I would go off and I would look at those words, committing them to memory. The morning that we shot the scene, I want to believe it was probably 6 or 7 weeks into our time in Thailand. And I'd like to believe that I was sufficiently in tune with Paul at that point in the proceedings so that I had made certain decisions about why I was saying what I was saying. And I just proceeded to mine those things in the various takes that we did of the scene. But I did hear Spike say, leave him alone. He's in the zone. Leave him alone. I heard that. I heard him say that.
Yeah.
And, again, deeply affirming.
Mm-hmm.
The crew. There were, film crews, they don't say too much. They do their jobs. And there were certain members of the crew that said certain things to me that really meant a lot to me in terms of acknowledging what I was doing. Small things. They were not effusive.
Do you remember a specific one?
One gentleman said, man, I'm enjoying what you're doing, man. That's all he said. But you get these, what I call affirmations, and it means a lot. I'm not naive enough to think that experiences like this come along every day. They do not. However, to the extent that everything I've learned and experienced as an actor, I poured into this work, Paul, I want to believe that there is more where that came from that I will then continue to pour into, contribute to whatever future work I do. If I ever get hired again.
I'm sure. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for joining us today, Delroy.
God bless. All the best. Take care of yourself. Bye now. Bye-bye.